back on the record. The time is 6:32.
Doctor, what I'd like to do now is to make sure the ladies and gentlemen of the jury understand the volume and depth of the work that you've done in this case, what you've reviewed, what you've relied upon, okay?
Sure.
First of all, you talked a little bit this morning about colors and color coding for your folders and documents, and I actually had a sheet made that had some colors on them if we went that way. Can you explain that to the jury so they'll know what they're seeing as we go forward?
Objection form. The green should go on top.
Whoops, sorry about
No
that.
problem. Well, I mean, I don't think we're going to go through this now, but at any rate, I classify things by categories of color. So green would be knowledge. So all the things that I talked about this morning, where the NCAA knew about the magnitude of the concussion problem, what they should do to try to reduce the problem, that would be called green. Red would be response to knowledge, just because the R goes with response. In other words, what did they do in response to what they knew? And then the blue there would be, why did they make that decision? What was the reason that they gave for not doing things in this case?
And we're going to go through...
Or doing things.
I'm sorry, Doctor.
No problem.
We're going to go through it in some more detail, but for example, the jury can see with the camera on you, you've got some green folders in front of you. Does that mean those folders are knowledge folders?
Yes.
Objection form.
What about the
reading.
blue folders? What are those?
Oh, that's duty. Okay, this is like the things where I said that the NCAA said that they had an ethical and moral and legal obligation to protect workers from concussions. So these are those documents.
Okay. You also, I think you'd mentioned the color purple earlier today. Can you describe that?
Purple is the blue.
The
That's
blue. Okay.
Objection form.
So what I'd like to do, Doctor, is go over the things that you brought today and make sure we're clear on what all that is. Now, the first thing I'd like to talk about, and Ed, do you have some stickers for me, please? I think 7, maybe.
Wait, hang on a second, I'll double check it. I think it's 7.
7's the new one, or 7 was the last
7
one?
is the new one.
Yeah, that's
I
what I
think.
thought. All right. So, Doctor, I'm going to mark as Exhibit 7 what appears to be a PowerPoint with the cover page NCAA history. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, that's what I went through this morning.
Did you create this PowerPoint?
Yes.
What was its purpose?
Its purpose was to go through what the NCAA knew, when they knew it, and what they did about it, and then why they said they did or did not do things with
So,
respect to public health interventions.
Objection non-responsive.
and you discussed a number of documents or referenced a number of documents in this PowerPoint, correct?
Yes,
Objection form.
You held up some cartoons, for example, you recall that?
yes,
And referenced some documents?
yes.
Objection form.
Are the documents that are contained in or referenced in this PowerPoint materials that you've relied upon for your opinions in this case?
Yes,
Objection form. Objection leading.
Does this PowerPoint reflect your opinions in this case? At least in part.
many of them, yes.
All right.
Most of them.
Objection form.
Now, we have a number of documents in boxes, and I call your attention to the second page of the PowerPoint, and you see it shows EGILMAN Exhibit 1. Do you see that?
Yes.
What is that reference, Doctor?
Oh, we've got a list here. Can I see the list?
Absolutely. I'm going to mark that for you.
I haven't memorized the
No.
list.
We're on the same page. Let me mark that as Exhibit 8. And Stephan, I don't know that if I have an extra copy, so I'm happy to let you see it before he takes it.
Yeah.
But it's just a list of these exhibits.
Oh, sorry.
Doctor, we've handed you what's been marked as Exhibit 8. Can you state what that is?
Sure, this is a list that goes to the PowerPoint listing on each page when there's a document there, this exactly says what the document is.
All right, so by way of example, what does Exhibit 8, how's that reference EGILMAN Exhibit 1 from the PowerPoint?
That's the Gridiron Crisis of 1905, published in 2000.
And do we have a box somewhere where all the exhibits for this PowerPoint have been assembled?
We do.
And why don't we go ahead and mark that box as exhibit number 9, okay?
Sure.
Ms. Williams, can you handle that for me? I don't know how heavy it is. Can you bring me the box just so we can have the jury see it?
There are two.
Okay. And can someone else grab the other one if you don't mind? I'll be all right, thank you. The other way. Number 1.
No.
No? No?
What
Huh?
document do you
I
need?
just want to show exhibit number 1 from
Okay.
this. That's all I want to show. So is that,
No.
it's not the one that says 1? I'm sorry, Chris.
That particular one is, yes.
Okay.
Those are not.
All right, so doctor, for example, if I can find my sticker page. Let me show you what I'm going to mark as exhibit number 10. And does that appear to be the same as exhibit that's referenced as exhibit number 1 on your PowerPoint?
Objection form.
Yes.
And if we went through this timeline, or this outline, we would find correlative exhibits for all of these exhibits in these boxes. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
All right. These various exhibits these various sub-exhibits, if you will, within Exhibit 9, are these all materials you've relied upon for your opinions in this case?
Yes.
Okay, we can move that.
Objection form.
Doctor, next I'd like
There's
to...
another box.
Oh, the second, it's all the same part of it. And so if I pulled one out of here, Doctor, why don't I pull this one? This is the 1964-65 NCAA yearbook. Is that a document you recall relying upon in this case?
Yes.
I'm going to mark that as exhibit number 11.
But that's not going to now correspond to what the PowerPoint
No,
is.
I'm just separately putting it there, and it's his own exhibit number for the PowerPoint. I understand that.
Okay.
Objection form.
But does that appear to be a document you relied upon?
Yes.
Form.
When you testified earlier today that you rely upon corporate documents, is this an example of that?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Doctor. Doctor, we have a bookshelf behind you that's got all sorts of things on it. If we can turn and talk about that for just a moment.
Sure.
First of all, we have a number of books that are up there. And I don't want to mark those for copyright and all those sorts of things, but we'll make sure we tell the jury about them. Can you tell me about the books that are up there, please?
Sure.
Form.
Okay, the first one's Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy. That's by Budson, McKee, and others. This is the proceedings of a meeting at BU on Alzheimer's. This is an Alzheimer's Disease Center conference. This one is Horns, Hogs, and Nixon's Coming. This is about the Texas versus Arkansas in Dixie's Last Stand, big football game.
You have an understanding of whether or not Greg Plitz played in that game?
He did. And we have League of Denial by Mark Ferenuru and Steve. They're I can't pronounce their names, but
Finaro.
Finaro, but they're brothers. There's an ESPN movie that goes with this. This is Acres of Skin, which is next week's course topic in my course, but it's about informed consent. and the prison experiments done on African Americans in Pennsylvania, where they were used as unwilling subjects in skin experiments.
Okay.
One of the victims is teaching my class next week. This is The Business of Sports by Rosner and Shropshire. This is the NCAA book called In the Arena, the NCAA's First Century from 2006, I believe. This is the, okay, Unsportsmanlike Conduct by the guy who ran the NCAA for 27 years, with my stickies. This is the Handbook of Warnings that I mentioned before. I think that's it for the books. Oh, I have the Bible too. And the Bible's relevant because the first place where they talked about warning workers is in Deuteronomy.
Are all these books relevant to your opinions in this case?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you one quick question, if we could, about the CTE book, Doctor. There might be more than one question, but one topic.
Sure.
Form and non-responsive to the previous answer.
I'm going to mark this as exhibit number 12, and I'll put a copy of this on the screen for the jurors to see. And this is the proceedings of the Boston University Alzheimer's Disease Center Conference, correct, Doctor?
Yes.
Form.
And you reviewed this book?
Yes.
Can you turn to, I think, and you reviewed this book. And is this book relevant to your opinions?
Yes.
All right. Can you turn to what would be book page 22? I'm going to have to try to zoom in on this, but I put an orange sticky on there for our,
Right.
see if I can get it to show up on there.
This could be above your level of technical
It could be.
competence.
It could be. I'm not good for much after the sports scores. Do you remember that counsel asked you a bunch of questions about whether you knew about any studies of non-sports brains? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Form.
Are you familiar with the Mayo Clinic?
Yes.
Is that a highly respected institution?
Leading.
By
What,
me.
what is the reputation of the Mayo Clinic?
It's a highly respected institution in my view. The one medical institution in the United States that really teaches and practices medical ethics. In 3 or 4 examples, their IRBs, institutional review boards, and others have spotted wrong practices and eliminated them. And I've talked to graduates of that school who are the most precise people concerned about informed consent and proper conduct in medicine.
Non-responsive.
Now, you see here there's a heading, Consensus Criteria Independently Verified. Do you see that?
Yes.
And there's a reference to Kevin Bienick, a young investigator at the Mayo Clinic who looked through 1,700 autopsy male brains. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is this one of the papers that you looked at as part of your investigation for this case?
Yes.
And it goes on and says, he found CTE in 21 brains, and lo and behold, all 21 were contact sport athletes. Do you see that?
Yes.
Form.
Is that an example of a study that you were referring to counsel earlier with respect to examinations of brains that showed CTE and a connection to repetitive head trauma?
Form.
Yes.
Is this is the Mayo Clinic work something you relied upon in this case?
Yes.
Form leading.
And if we turn to page 37, Doctor,
Right.
do you see it cites a specific reference to the paper published by Mr. Bienick from the Mayo Clinic? Do you see that?
Dr. Bienick.
Excuse me, Dr.
Bienick.
Bienick, my apologies.
It's okay. Yes.
And that's that paper would be one of the materials you relied upon in this case?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Doctor.
Form leading.
What else do we have back there on the shelves, Doctor? I see rows and rows of documents. Can you tell us about that, please?
Sure. These are all documents that I cited in my report in the case, I'm pretty sure, all of them. And so that would be the citations, full citations for all the report documents.
All right, and why don't we collectively, I'll need some new stickers, Ed.
Objection form, objection non-responsive to the previous question and answer.
What are those? And he said what they are is non-responsive? Really?
Mhm.
And you think that's a form objection too?
I'm trying to give you space to have your record and not talk over each other.
No, you're just making frivolous objections. That's my concern. What are those documents as a form objection, really? Can we stop so I can get some stickers from him, please? All right, Doctor, with your permission, we'll collectively mark all those documents as Exhibit 13, okay?
Sure.
Now, do you have a recollection, Doctor, and I don't want to ask you to guess, but do you have a recollection of how many pages of documents I sent you from the NCA regarding this case?
500,000 or so, I think?
Form.
Do you know anyone that has looked at this NCA history in more detail than you have?
Form.
No.
Doctor, you were asked some questions earlier today, went back to your decision as to not to continue to play football. Do you recall that?
Right.
And you testified about how insurance played, or lack of insurance coverage played a role.
Yes,
Objection form.
Do you recall that testimony?
I do.
Form.
I'd like to posit a hypothetical to you, if I may.
Sure.
If I was to tell you that the NCAA's insurance coverage has an exclusion for CTE, do you understand me so far?
Yes.
Form.
Would that be meaningful to your opinions in this case?
Yes.
Why?
Well, that would
Form.
indicate that the insurance companies know that playing football and other contact sports increases the risk of CTE so much that they're unwilling to insure for that. In other words, they think they can't estimate how much it would cost if people were actually compensated for getting CTE from playing football and other contact sports, which means they think there's a huge risk, that is financial risk, to the NCAA if they ever had to compensate the people who develop CTE as a result of playing sports, as a result of NCAA's inadequate response to their obligations to prevent those injuries.
Have you seen anything out there to indicate one way or another whether the NCAA has disclosed to folks whether or not it has insurance for these types of injuries or future damages?
Non-responsive to the previous answer. Objection form to that question.
No.
Stefan, I'm going to point him that way if you want to move. Doctor, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the blow-ups and what we have with us here today. All right?
Right.
And first, because I had this one over here so I could have a hold of it, we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I'll have it on the camera here and give it to you, but it appears to be a plaque or an award that was given to Greg Pletz for the 1971 season. Can you tell me if or why that plaque award was relevant to you in this case?
Well, this is an anti-warning. This is the NCAA presenting not even an image, because this is actually metal on wood. So some kind of a huge, heavy image of someone spearing. Okay, this would indicate that spearing is not only okay, it's an admired activity to be done. You get an award for it, essentially. This is the worst kind of anti-warning I could ever imagine. Telling people at public meetings that spearing gets you the championship, basically.
Doctor, did you receive, as part of your review of materials in this case, game films from Mr. Pletz's play at the University of Texas?
Yes.
Did you see examples such as depicted in this exhibit?
You mean of actual people getting speared? Yes.
Yes, sir. Doctor, if we may, I'm going to go ahead and put an exhibit sticker on that as well. We'll make that exhibit number 14, if I can hand that to you. Now, up here to my right, your left, Doctor, there's another blow up, if you will, stated sources of information. Can you describe what that is for us, please?
Sure, these are the kinds of places someone at the NCAA could have gone to get information about the risks of concussion from playing contact sports, especially football. So it's medical journal articles, medical meetings, medical textbooks, trade publications, general publications, company meetings and correspondence, internal company information, and consultants.
Doctor, do you have an opinion as to whether or not the NCAA had any sort of obligation to actually go to these sources?
Yes,
What is your opinion?
they claim they did. They claim they had an ethical and moral and legal obligation for the health and safety of the players in NCAA sports. They were formed to prevent injuries, particularly head injuries resulting in death.
And if I can ask you a two-part follow-up question on that. First of all, based on your review of 500,000 pages of documents and depositions and books and so forth, did the NCAA go to those sources to glean this information?
Form.
Historically, no. They had some of this information.
The information the NCAA did have, did they disclose it?
Form.
No.
And is that proper conduct, improper conduct? Which way?
Form.
Let me ask you again. Do you have an opinion as to whether or not it was proper for the NCAA not to disclose that information to players like Greg Plentz?
Form.
Yes.
What is that opinion?
It was not proper. It was anti-public health.
Has the NCAA's conduct changed as far as you can tell here in 2018?
Based on the recent depositions I read, not a whit.
Objection form. Objection leading.
Doctor, I'd like to also go ahead. We have some more. Well, let me first give you sticker number 15 that we can put on the sources of information poster. And then, Stephanie, you're probably going to want to move again, or we can bring them around, whichever way we'd like to do it.
Can we go off the record?
Sure.
So how?
Can we just leave it on the video there? While I hate for him to have to keep starting and stopping. You're just trying to get out of the way.
Well, I'm trying to get out of the way. I'm also trying to figure out the logistics of making sure my objections are being heard.
Stefan, I gave you a running objection. You just want to be obstinate and not take it.
Well,
That you could have an objection to every question and you wouldn't have to worry about it.
while I'm moved, until we're able to go back, I'll take the running objection.
Yeah, I think well, we got three over here, so let's start with. I'm sorry, we went off. You ready to go back on?
I'm still willing to.
No, I know you are. Are you ready to go back on the typed record, Stephanie?
Why don't you bring those over
Still
to
have-
me?
Did you that I have the running objection?
Yeah, put each of them one at a time.
Sorry,
Well,
sorry,
I can't
Ed.
do it because I don't have
Sorry, Ed. Let's just go off the written record for the moment. Get that, y'all. Sorry, Ed.
David, which one do you want first?
I think you want to do knowledge first?
Yeah.
So if I say something over here and I'm not mic'd up, it doesn't count? Oh,
And you don't have to lean in over.
I do or I do not?
You do not.
Okay.
I know. And while I'm doing the stuff on this, if you could push back just a little bit.
You
so I
just
can
tell me
get
where
my-
you just tell me where you need me. You're the director, so. Triette? Not sure how many we have over there, but why don't I give you these stickers so you guys have them over there? The doctor can put them on there.
Okay,
Starting from 16, right?
Yeah.
And volume is back up. We're
Can I
continuing
just,
rolling.
it'll be easier in terms of, do we have hard copies of these on pieces of paper?
We have hard copies of these, but not those. I could print them.
If you can print those hard copies, perhaps it would be better to just put the stickers on the
We will.
paper. then they don't, then
Is
he
that all
won't.
right? Then he doesn't have to truck the blow-ups around. We'll do hard copies of the same exact thing. We just have to print them out.
Oh, I actually, did Nancy leave?
Yeah,
I don't have the motive one. I don't have the purple.
Well,
Okay.
we'll be able to put them in. We'll identify them and we'll be able to put them in.
I'll email her right now and try
Yeah.
to get it.
So wait,
I'll
we-
try to get it.
What are you saying? You're going to mark those and then, but later
Well,
on.
I will mark those as what they are, and he'll describe them, and then we'll give Ed the printed out version of the same exact thing. So that way he doesn't have to cart
on
posters
pieces of
around.
paper.
Yeah, we'll just have them on a piece of paper.
Okay.
Obviously, that's where they come from. These are just blown up.
Okay.
So you'll get the same exact thing. It'll just be paper size.
I hate to be a bear. You got the part about the.
This is what I think I heard.
I'll
since
just
you were
say,
both talking
Stefan,
at the
I'll just
same
say it
time,
when we go
but this
back
is what
on.
I got.
Okay? I'll say it when we go
That's the
back
best.
on. It's all right.
To objection form, objection leading, all the.
Whatever it is.
Okay, we are still rolling. Volume is now fully back up.
Thank you, Chris and Ed. And just so the record's clear, just so we can try to move this along and some of the logistics, I again offered counsel a running objection to all the questions and answers, and he's accepted that. So we'll move forward in that regard.
That's to all available deposition objections. Correct.
Say again. This is
That's for all available deposition objections. Correct.
So doctor, there's some green shaded posters up on the board right now. Can you tell us what those are, please?
Those indicate knowledge that was available to or in the possession of the NCAA over time.
All right. So can you give us just a couple of examples so the jury will understand what you're talking about? So on this first page.
Okay, let's look at 1909. Football Rules Committee was aware of 32 deaths in the fall season and suggested rule changes, which were not implemented. 1910, concussions were increasing. It was the leading cause of death in football in 1910. New York Times reported 14 deaths from concussion that year. And then 1927, brain concussion needs close examination for football. That was an article by Fishbein, and he identified football as a cause of concussions. That's in a published medical article.
Okay, and we'll have the record reflect that'll be exhibit number 16. Can we look at the next blow up, doctor, and have you tell me what that reflects? Just the first. Take the first piece off. There we go.
Okay.
Can you tell me about this page, please, doctor?
Sure, this is more of the same. Basically, this is a shorter summary of what's on all those, 24 posters down there. So this is a subset of those.
And
And,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, doctor.
okay, so there we have, so that's what's here. Basically, it's showing what was known when about the risks of head injuries. Some are NCAA documents, some are published papers.
So, for example, it looks like about the fourth one down is 1933 NCAA Handbook on Prevention and Care of Athletic Injuries. Do you see that?
Yes,
Is that a document you relied upon in this case?
yes.
What's the meaning of that document to you in the context of this case?
Well, that document was the document that indicated the NCAA was aware of the problem of concussions and aware of things they could do to implement concussions, and they put them in that document, but they didn't pass them until they got sued and implemented them as part of the settlements of lawsuits.
Well, did they implement those proposals in the 1930s,
No,
the 1940s,
no,
1950s?
no,
I was born in the 1960s. Did they do it then?
no,
1970s?
no,
1980s?
no,
1990s?
no,
My son was born in 2005. Did they do it by then?
no,
Have they implemented all of those recommendations here today, 85 years later?
no.
All right. You also cited the 1937 American Football Coaches Association. Why did that document matter to you?
Well, I talked about the fact that players were allowed to play after concussion, and that was a wrong thing to do. And they said that the personal contact should be eliminated after an individual has suffered a single concussion.
Are you familiar with the term return to play protocol?
Yes.
What does that mean, doctor?
Well, now it means that if you have a concussion or a subconcussion, you have to go through medical exam, and there's a gradual stepped increase in exercise along with medical observation before you can go back to play.
As of, 1937, let's use that one. Did the NCAA have information available to it regarding appropriate return to play protocols?
Not all of it. They knew that they shouldn't return to play, basically.
And the NCAA implemented it at that time?
No,
Well, how about 1957?
no,
How about 1967 when Greg Plett started playing?
no.
Did the NCAA ever institute any kind of return to play rules prior to being sued in the last few years?
No.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not the NCAA's conduct with regards to return to play was appropriate?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
It was not. It was not. They did not respond appropriately to the recommendations that were available to them, even that their own people had made, nor was it appropriate response to what was known in the general scientific and medical community.
Doctor, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about the bottom two on this knowledge, which we'll mark as exhibit number 17. There's a reference to the CSMAS. What was that committee?
That was the committee to deal with health and safety issues of athletes.
And there's a reference on your chart, recommends mandatory mouth guards 1963. Why is that important to your opinions in this case?
Well, it was thought, although incorrectly, that mouth guards would reduce concussions, and they knew about that. And that committee was a committee of the NCAA that recommended it, but NCAA process didn't allow the committee in charge of health and safety to make the decisions about health and safety. It had to go up the chain of command there and be voted on by people who were administrators of the NCAA.
Doctor, do you have an opinion as to whether or not the NCAA should have been, in the 1960s, relying on the recommendations of doctors as to how to properly handle health and safety for its players?
Yes.
And what's that opinion?
Yeah, they should have.
Based on the evidence you've seen, did the NCAA follow through and implement the recommendations of doctors to keep players healthy and safe, say in the 1960s?
In general, no.
What about this reference in 1965 to a ban of spearing and butt blocking? Why is that important to you?
Well, that was the first recommendation that sparing be banned, and without mentioning you had to prove intent or something else, or without loopholes.
And I guess we know that by 1971 it hadn't been implemented, correct?
Correct. That's correct.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not rules banning spearing and butt blocking would have been useful for preventing future brain damage and even deaths of football players?
Yes,
What's that opinion?
it would have been.
All right. Let's go ahead and mark that as 17, and if we can look at the next poster, Doctor, which we'll go ahead and mark as Exhibit 18. And Doctor, we have some red on this poster. Can you tell me what that the red refers to?
That's what the NCAA did about all the knowledge at those different points in time.
Okay.
So that's response to knowledge. The R in response corresponding to the red color.
Now, I'd like to ask you about the very first one at the top, still in green, Doctor. AMA endorses heads-up tackling. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it goes on and references a statement by the Kentucky High School, in the Kentucky High School athlete publication. Do you see that?
Right.
What's your understanding of heads-up tackling?
Well, that's a way of avoiding spearing.
And this was recommended by the AMA. What is the AMA?
The American Medical Association, which at this time probably 70% of U.S. physicians were members of.
Do you have an estimate of how many doctors that would be? Are we in the tens or hundreds of thousands?
Oh, yes.
Did the NCAA take the advice of the American Medical Association?
No. The Kentucky High School Association did.
And did you see that in the documents you were provided in this case?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not the NCAA should have listened to the AMA in 1967?
Yes.
What's that opinion?
They should have.
Now, if we go down a little bit further, Doctor, the first red that you have, NCAA Medical Handbook 1981. Can you explain to us why you put that in red?
That's the first handbook after 1933. So for however many years that is, 70 years,
48?
48 years, pardon me, 48 years, right. Getting a little tired here. That would have been 48 years they didn't put out a new handbook.
Been easy if it'd been the next year, right? One would have been easy.
Yeah,
to
I
add.
might have got that one right.
All right. So, Doctor, so let's talk about a few questions about that. First of all, do you have an opinion whether or not it was appropriate for the NCA to wait 48 years to update its medical handbook?
Yes,
What's that opinion?
it was not.
I take it that 1981 handbook had a discussion about concussions and subconcussive hits and brain damage?
No,
Do you have an opinion about whether or not it was proper not to have that discussed in 1981?
yes, I mean, it was discussed in 1933, so it should have stayed in there in 1981.
Well, did the NCA remedy that in 1982 or 1983? Catch on, we made a mistake?
No,
Well, when did the NCA finally talk about head trauma and concussions again in a handbook?
I don't know, but it would have been after they got sued, I think.
Okay.
That would have been within the last 5 or 10 years.
Now, it looks like on your chart they did it in 1994. Do you see that?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well,
And-
that's a mention of concussion.
okay. But
That's not a full implementation of a concussion program.
let me ask it to you this way, Doctor. Are you familiar with the current NCA medical handbook?
Yes,
Has the current NCA medical handbook, does it have a full disclosure of all the facts an athlete or their parents should know about concussions and the risks of brain damage?
no,
Should it?
yes,
If asked, would you be able to design what you believe would be an appropriate warning for these athletes?
my students are doing it.
And it's something you think somebody should do, is that correct?
My students are going to be paid this summer to finish it.
All right. All right, so let's
I'm
go.
anxious to help the NCAA do the right thing.
Can we turn to the next one?
All right. What is anti-warnings?
Why don't we do anti-warnings? And we'll put the next sticker, I think it's 19. Doctor, first of all, the color. Can you remind the jury what the color means here?
So this is anti-warnings, which are false reassurance that it's kind of response to knowledge, but so it's a light red because it distinguishes from actually doing something to doing something that makes the problem worse. And these are things that they did that made the problem worse by falsely reassuring people that there wasn't anything to worry about.
And you've talked about that at length today, whether it's the award Mr. Pletz got or what was the concussions being helmet proof. Is that
Yes,
right?
I think I did almost all of these. Maybe I didn't talk about Klossner's testimony.
Well, let me ask you this question, Doctor, that'll help on some of the more recent stuff. As we sit here today, do you have an opinion where the NCAA is still propounding anti-warnings to these athletes?
Sure,
And what is that opinion?
they are.
And I take it, well, let me strike that.
Well, they're making the same claims that their lawyer here tried to impugn when he quoted sections of those documents from the last couple of years. That's exactly what the NCAA is doing, taking those out of context quotes or creating literature that shed some question about whether repetitive injuries cause CTE. It's the tobacco company approach to public health,
And Doctor, if
creating doubt,
sorry, my
creating
apologies.
doubt about whether or not there's a problem.
If I can backtrack for just a moment, one of the books you talked about was League of Denial. Do you recall that?
Right, yeah.
Does the NFL still deny that CTE is caused by repetitive head trauma?
No.
All right, why don't we go to the purple? And we'll mark that as exhibit number 20. And can you remind the jury what the color purple means in terms of how you present your opinions, Doctor, please.
Sure, it's motive. In other words, this explains why the NCAA, what the NCAA said about why they did or did not do something.
Generally speaking, Doctor, do you have an opinion as to the NCAA's motive for the misconduct that you've discussed in this case?
Yes,
And what is your opinion as to that motive?
it was all about the money.
Well, you mean only recently or starting when?
During the whole time period, they wanted revenue from these sports. They knew if they warned people about the risks, they decrease revenue. They knew that some of these things that they would do would cost more money. Even just what Byers said about, geez, if we substitute healthy people for healthy workers for injured people injured during a game, that's going to cost us more in equipment costs. So they were worried about money from a nickel and dime perspective to a huge perspective in terms of only making change after they got sued when they were at risk of losing millions of dollars in those lawsuits.
And by Byers, you mean Walter Byers, who was the CEO of the NCAA from 1951 to 1987?
Yes,
Did you read his book?
yes,
And that book was, I believe, written in 1995. Does that sound correct?
yes.
Did Mr. Byers in that book say, I did the right thing, I'm happy about what we did, and so forth, or did he say something else?
He said something else.
What did he say?
He said he messed up, NCAA messed up. He specifically discussed this fake creation of the student-athlete construct to defeat lawsuits. All the things that I said earlier this morning on NCAA counsel's questioning, those things, a lot of them came from Byers. Byers, I guess you'd say, got religion after he lost his position. Started talking about what the truth was about what the NCAA had done over time.
I'd just like to ask you about one, maybe two things on this poster, Doctor. The 1929 reference, can you talk about that and why that was important to you?
Sure, the Carnegie Foundation in 1929 wrote a report about injuries in sports and football, and they specifically said that NCAA hadn't changed because of money.
And that was 1929?
Yes.
And then a couple more down, we have another reference to Mr. Byers' book that I'd like to have you focus on under 1960s, and there's a quote there from him on this exhibit. Can you explain if and why that quote is important to you in this case?
Let me read it.
Please.
I was charged with the dual mission of keeping intercollegiate sports clean while generating millions of dollars each year as income for colleges. These were compelling and competing tasks. As the enormous financial rewards for winning expanded during the 1960s, NCAA enforcement never kept pace.
Why is that quote important to you, Doctor?
Because he's saying that health and safety was in competition with money, making money. And he says that health and safety was second fiddle.
Thank you, Doctor. We can put that one down. Doctor, if Chris can help us, if we pan to your right and my left, there's all sorts of additional posters up on the board. And you can do it from there if you want to walk over there, we can do it that way. But can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what all these posters represent?
That's a compilation summary of all of the medical articles and key NCAA documents that indicate what was known when about the risks of concussion from football and other traumatic sports.
And you cited those in your report or in your reference materials?
I don't think I cited them all, but I brought them all here.
Why don't we go ahead, what number are we up to? All right,
You didn't mark that one.
Oh, I thought we did. My apologies. 21 for that one, and then 22. We'll do all of those collectively down there. For that, is you have a paper of that sheet? Great.
The
Wait,
green
wait.
one is those.
Hang on a minute. I think, was there a different purple one up there that you were just discussing and you took it down?
Oh, that is what happened. We had a
Yeah.
second purple one. I didn't realize there was a second purple one. So that's okay. We'll come back to it. Doctor, what is it now? This second purple exhibit, please.
This is just continuing the timeline on motive issues.
And let's look at the one at the very bottom, if we can, Doctor.
Sure.
What is that one?
That says, that's 2017. NCAA reports 1.1 billion in revenues. And the number that's not on here is how much was spent on health and safety in general, which is about 30 million, I think.
Do you recall what percent is being spent on health and safety?
Well, you could divide 30 million by 1.1 billion. It's not a big number.
Let me
It's
ask
like
you.
3%,
Let me ask you this, Doctor. Do
less
you,
than 3%.
do you believe that the NCAA? Let's strike that. Do you have an opinion whether or not the NCAA is devoting enough money, resources, and effort into health and safety issues for its athletes?
Yes, I have an opinion.
What is that opinion?
It's ridiculously trivial, in particular since the NCAA purpose is health and safety.
Okay. And so let's go back, Doctor, to make sure we're clear on these posters to your right. Can you? I think we got out of whack there for a second. So can you just please restate what those are?
Those are the historical medical literature and NCAA documents that talk about knowledge of things related to trauma and the effects of trauma that occur during football and other contact sports and head trauma in general.
Are these documents relevant to your opinions?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion whether or not the NCAA should have familiarity with all these materials?
Oh, yes.
What is that opinion?
They should.
Based on the evidence, you strike that. Do you have an opinion whether or not the NCAA should make decisions or take actions based on what is in all of these materials?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
They should.
And do you have an opinion whether the NCAA has acted properly with all of this information that you've talked to us about today?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
They have not.
Can we take a quick break?
Going off the record, the time is 7:19.